in a very rare podcast that is really almost like letting you tap into a party line telephone where I talk with Paula B. So, Paula B Fitness and her killer bees. I'm talking about Paula B is my interviewee on this episode, and I think you're going to love it today. You're going to get to hear us talk about her ultra marathon. That means more than one longer distance. And you can check yes and yes in all those boxes. And my Ironman experience. We talk a little bit about our similarities, not only in philosophy, in working with women in midlife, but also of our own tuning into our body's needs, moving on maybe from somebody who was an ultra marathon runner and an Ironman into whatever is next, even if we don't know what that is yet. So listen over the fence as we have this chat. Can't wait for you to hear it. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top struggles and concerns, and most of all, hope to inspire you that with the right food, the right movement, and the right mindset, potentially about both of those, you can have the energy and the vitality that you want, need, and deserve in this second and better half. Let's get started. Drop in, eavesdrop. It's all on me. My guest today is Pahla Bowers. She's a fitness expert, mindset mentor, and life coach who motivates women of a certain age from around the world to make peace with their menopausal bodies by finding a healthy weight and moving in ways that feel like self-love. She creates workouts that work for women in midlife and beyond. Do we sound like sisters or what? Her friendly and encouraging exercise routines, mindset shifting podcast, and buzzing Facebook community of killer bees help women transform from cautious to confident, one fun workout at a time. Pahla, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Okay, that intro sounded so professional. I'm like, but I'm just me. I'm Pahla.
So, and I want to tell people, so killer bees, that's like with the letter B, playing on your last name. Love that.
Exactly. Yes. And that story behind that actually is because I used to run an early morning boot camp. And, in order to get up and go exercise at 5 a.m., you really have to feel strong and part of the group, and there's a reason that you're there. And so I called them my bumblebees for a hot second, and they were like, no, we are killer bees if we are here out in the cold and the heat and the everything at 5 a.m. And so that name has just totally stuck for years and years, long since I have stopped doing that early morning boot camp.
Love it. I love that. And I love the connotation. I think it was very recently, I had an interview that may or may not have aired by the time this one does with someone named Sharky. And I said, I'm not going anywhere talking about any questions until I learn, how'd you get that name? Because
Right?
there's Tiger and then there's Sharky. I mean, give me that story. So, okay. So
I'll look forward to that one. That sounds cool.
Seriously, listeners, you are just here getting to listen to a conversation. So typically we've got this big prep line that we have happen behind the scenes, and we come up with a list of questions that we'll answer and cover. And what I have here is, let's just talk about your personal story. Let's talk about your story and my story. So literally, this is dishing. This is like us just dishing. And you can imagine we have a cold drink in our hands, and you can imagine whatever it might be, whatever you like, but mine will probably be water. So sorry.
Mine too.
See, I don't know where you live, but I should have you come over. So
yes.
Here's how I learned about Pahla in two ways. So number one, she was passed along to me by a client, a private client. And she says, I follow Pahla B. You would love her. You two are so similar. You have the same philosophy, and not once, but 2 or 3 or 4 times. And I'm like, oh, I got to find out, who is this chick? Who is this? I should probably know about her. Why don't I know about her? In fact, what am I doing? So I went, and one of the very first of your YouTube videos that I watched, and phenomenal YouTube channel, by the way, everybody. And it was about you whispering, kind of like, I did something kind of crazy this weekend. And, you know, like I was thinking, jump out of an airplane. No, no. I did an ultra marathon, and she's doing a workout. This is as she's doing the warm up to a workout. And so I'm like, no way. Okay. So I'm like, as someone who's done 8 Ironman triathlon, I kind of get that. And I have to admit that while I'm spinning, doing my indoor long rides, oftentimes I'm watching like ultra marathon footage, like my experience. And those kinds of videos actually keep me going, because while you're paddling for hours indoors by yourself, it's like, I got to know that somebody else has done something harder than this.
Isn't that the truth? Oh my gosh, I love it.
So your running story, though, let's start unpacking that, because you started later in life running, and I've got to know how you got to the point where you said in the green room before we started, you've done several ultras, and then you told me the whole story, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to have to kiss your feet.
Well, okay, before I get into my running story, I have to tell you that the reason I know who you are is because YouTube actually knows that we are soul sisters. YouTube suggests you to me all the time. And I ended up listening to your podcast on my phone, which I don't think my phone talks to YouTube, but maybe they do. All these smart devices these days. But I listen to your podcast when I am on my
It's
treadmill.
Alexa, that bitch. She's telling
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
Right. But I listen to your podcast while I'm on my treadmill doing hard things and reminding myself that there's a reason for hormones and for all of this, that I want to be able to like love my body and do the right thing. And it's so funny that we listen to each other while we're exercising.
Sweet.
But my running story, I mean, my story, just my exercise story in general, is that I was a wildly uncoordinated child. I literally failed skipping when I was in kindergarten, which used to be a graded thing, apparently, back in the like early 1970s. Who knew? But this is what I remember of kindergarten. I loved my teacher, and I couldn't skip, and it was on my report card that I couldn't skip. So this was where my mental idea of myself formed, was from early childhood, that I didn't like sports, that I wasn't good at them, and that I was not athletic at all. And yet I knew that I wanted to run. Like there was always this thing. I had tried running, oh gosh, probably at least a dozen times in my lifetime. And it was just way too hard. I mean, there was nothing about it that was enjoyable. It was super difficult. And yet I still came back to it again and again and again. And one morning, in the very dark dark cover of night, I was like, I wonder if I could run 50 steps. And so I did. I counted my steps while I was running. I was like 37 years old, and I counted 50 steps of running. And then I walked for 100 steps. And then I counted 50 more steps of running. And then I walked for 100 steps. And then I did that over and over again, with counting 50 steps of running and 100 steps of walking, until I had covered my normal walking route, which was probably about a mile, maybe a little bit less than a mile. And I had never felt like more like a superhero in my entire life than I did that morning. Like it literally changed my life. Like I know that sounds so ridiculous to say something like that, but I mean, if you've ever been through a transformative experience, which I know you have because you're an Ironman, that when you realize that you can do something that you didn't really think you could do, it just changed everything about who I was as a human being. And then it turned out that I really loved running. Like it wasn't that hard when I gave myself the ability to take it slightly easier, and to run and walk, and to just take it at my own pace, and without people looking at me, and all of those magical elements kind of came together. And within a year, I was a runner. I mean, it's been my whole personality and my persona now for 15 years, where I simply am a runner. It's not that I run, I am a runner.
Love
So
that.
yeah.
I love the, that you just were kind to yourself and let yourself take it slowly. Because I think that's the nugget in there that we both want listeners to take away and
Yes.
realize you don't have to jump in and do a 5 or a 10K or ever do one,
Yes.
whether or not right away.
Yeah.
Love that.
Or ever stop the walking intervals? That's actually a question that I get all the time. I mean,
Mm.
well, not even a question. Actually, people usually approach this to me as kind of a statement. Well, like, well, I want to do a 5K, but if I can't run the whole thing, then I'm not really doing a 5K. And I'm like, is there
Mhm.
something different about the distance if you're walking part of it that I
Mhm.
don't understand? Like, no, if you complete the distance, you have completed the distance. You can walk, you can run, you can do whatever it takes to get wherever you want to go. So and that's something, I mean, getting back to my ultra story, people ask me that all the time too. Like, you walk some of that, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I walk most of it.
Right. Yes.
that's, that's how you get through distances like that. You don't like just push the whole time. There's push and recover. And that's very, very critical to, I mean, life in general, but also to any kind of ultra distance event of any kind.
I love it. Okay, so bring me back to like from starting that first morning, you're doing this alternating, you're running and you're walking, your 50
Mm-hmm.
steps
Mm-hmm.
to the door front of, oh, I think I'll do an ultra. I mean, what happened between A and Z there?
Um, you know what really happened? My husband happened. So my husband started running about 6 months before I did. Now, to be fair, he had actually, I'm going to say always run, even though he had taken long breaks from running, but he had run like not competitively in high school, but like during gym class when you have to run, he was good at it, but he was too shy to try out for any team or anything like that. But then after high school, when he was in college, he was in the military. He did ROTC and then he was in the military. So, of course, you've got to run for that. And then he'd kind of run off and on since then. But about 6 months before I started running, um, he was watching our kids when they were off track. We used to do year-round school when my kids were little. And so he was home with them while I was at work. And he told me that he needed to get up about a half an hour earlier every day so that he could go for a run before I went to work so that he didn't lose his mind with the small children at home. And I was like, okay. But I watched him, like, his mental clarity, his physical transformation over the course of the 6 months. You could just watch him like become calmer, and he lost a couple of pounds and he felt fitter, and he was just happier and more like centered and everything. And I was like, well, I want some of that. And it's why I had that in my mind that morning. Like, I wonder if I could run. I wonder if I could do this. And so I don't mean to imply that I'm competitive with my husband, except that I'm totally competitive with my husband. That when he takes on a challenge, I'm like, well, of course I can do that. And I feel like, I mean, both of our children are boys, and I do feel like it's very good for them to see me, their mother, as a woman, as somebody who is capable of taking on the same kinds of physical challenges that their dad does. And so when my husband started running, I think very naturally decided to go longer and harder and more. And I think that some of that might be a manly thing, but I was totally in for the ride. I was like, if you can do it, I can too. And so he got interested in ultras. I don't know why. I kind of feel like anybody who runs kind of toys with the idea of doing a marathon. Like, do you remember the first time you did a triathlon? Weren't you kind of like, oh, I could do an Ironman? Like it was just kind of the thing, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think if you are somebody who's built for endurance anyway,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and that just is like, I mean, I kind of skipped. I did a short one and I was like, well, heck with this. Yeah, I got to work too hard. I'm going to go longer, slower.
Yes. Well, and I think that was probably the biggest appeal for me at the time too, that there was races where I felt like I was working so much harder to run a fast 5K than to run to me, enjoyable ultra marathon. Running an ultra marathon, I often describe it as an all-you-can-eat buffet with a little bit of running,
Yes.
because you just run from aid station to aid station and walk. Trust me, lots of walking. But you maneuver yourself from aid station to aid station, and then you have to fuel to keep going. And I mean, I don't want to imply that it's truly all you can eat. That's really just a joke, but you do have to fuel for that kind of activity, and you do have to find a speed that you can sustain for a very long time. And for most of us, that's not real fast. I'm never, ever, ever the first girl across the finish line. Well, except for that one race where there was only like 5 people total. But other than that, like, I'm not the fastest. I'm generally speaking not entirely the slowest, though I've been really close to that one too. I just like to keep moving. There's just something about being built for endurance. I love the way you say that, because I definitely am, where I just keep moving forward and it feels good.
Yeah, you know what it was for me, and that's what short was never for me. So when I was trying to go short, I mean, I was going short, but I was really trying to go short.
Uh-huh.
It was all about plugging into what's my speed and
Mm.
where am I at? What's my heart rate right now? And it became a job. And
Yeah.
so I lost the reason I'd ever started running in the first place. And when I was started going long and training longer, whether for marathons or training in triathlons later, I I'm writing the letters, and I'm having the conversations that I can never really have with people in my head while
Yeah.
I'm writing. I'm solving those problems and I'm coming back refreshed like I just went on vacation. And
Yeah.
then that wasn't happening, trying to go hard and fast and push.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, as soon as you lose the enjoyment of what you're doing, there's really no point in it. I mean, that was how I felt too about a lot of the effort that I was putting into running faster. It wasn't as pleasurable as just running because I love to run, going where I want to go, doing the things I want to do. I mean, that's kind of where I am now. I mean, the last time I ran an ultramarathon was almost a year and a half ago now. And the brain is still willing. The brain still, I mean, I remember what it feels like, and I still want to do that. But my body is like, hey, you know what feels really good now? Not running that long. and reminding myself that the pleasure of running is why I do this, that it's not just about satisfying my brain who wants to do more, 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 but satisfying my body who's like, hey, you know what? This distance feels really good. This is something that I could sustain forever. And that's kind of what I came to about a year and a half ago, when I really noticed that my body was changing. I really noticed that I was feeling very different after a hard effort, meaning like a long effort, not just a trying to go faster effort, but after a long effort, that I was taking so much longer to recover, and I didn't feel as good while I was running or afterwards. And I actually got to the point where I felt like I was losing fitness by going longer. And it feels like, that's such a strange thing to say. And it's still something that I'm kind of wrapping my brain around, feeling and noticing physically that my body doesn't respond to that kind of effort the way it used to. And so it's taken me a while. I mean, the pandemic helped. There were literally no races nearby, so I had to really dial it back. But it's taken me a while to kind of wrap my brain around the fact that that might have been my last ultra marathon, or at least my last for a while I'm still expending so much physical energy on other things. I mean, I literally exercise for a living. So there are things that I do for my job that kind of I have to manage in with my running schedule to be able to manage my recovery and manage my weight, my good feeling, my confidence, all of those things that go along with physical efforts.
Yeah, so love that. It's gosh, and it's not a coincidence. I mean, there are no accidents, but it's been about a year and a half ago. So, November 2019, I did my last, I say the most recent, I'll say that. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure it's the last, but I did Ironman Cozumel, and I really haven't run since. Not like that.
Yeah.
Not any distance. I do interval training, but
Hmm.
my body actually doesn't want to.
Yeah.
It's just, every time I go, there is never a flow. I never get into it. It's just like, and I stop and wonder, why am I doing this? And where did it go? And I don't know that I'll have the answer to that. But, during that year, as I was doing, it was my eighth, I gained 10 cortisol pounds. I mean, it was a major change. My body just didn't like it.
Yep.
And it had a bunch of other stressors then too, not just physical. But yeah, I mean, those are ways your body will tell you for sure. So I have a question though about, I don't know the rules to ultra. So do you or did you run? Is it legal to run with like an iPod or music?
It depends on the race. Generally speaking, so I had a couple of different ultra experiences. Most of my ultra experiences were on trails. And
Hmm.
for me personally, the point of being on a trail is to enjoy nature and to be out in the beauty of the world. I am absolutely a headphone runner when I'm doing like road running or on my treadmill. Like I love listening to music. I love listening to podcasts. Like I love having some other kind of input while I'm running. I call it mindlessly. That sounds so funny. I mean, it's not mindless, but it kind of is, as opposed to like being out in nature on the trails. So for me personally, I don't wear any kind of headphone device when I'm running trails. And some of that is because, I mean, trails themselves, it's a very different world. Most single track trails are called single track because there's literally only room for one person. So if you
Hmm.
have somebody who's faster than you coming up behind you, you really need to be able to hear them. You really need to be aware of your surroundings. Where I live, the trails that I run on, I mean, you can see bears, you can see wild animals. Like, I absolutely want to hear and be aware of my surroundings when I'm running on trails. Generally speaking, in my neighborhood, thankfully, I live in a city where I don't see bears. So I do have plenty of cars and I do have other pedestrians and things to be aware of. But it's not that same level that I like to be aware of during like a trail run. But I did run one ultra marathon, and this is the one that everybody's just like, most people, when I tell them this story, they just shake their heads. I ran 100K, which is 62 miles, on a 2 mile track. I
Oh my
went
God.
around that thing 31 times.
Ah, wow.
Now, that was absolutely mental endurance as well as physical endurance. So that one I did wear headphones because it was a completely closed loop, and that was actually the race that I was the first place female, because it was so tiny. It was just this little tiny race, and it was so much fun. And I actually really encourage somebody who wants to go an ultra distance but really wants like the safety factor to be as safe as possible. My husband was right there. I ran a 2 mile loop, 31 times. I saw him every 2 miles, whatever that took me, anywhere from, generally speaking, it was around, oh gosh, what was my average pace? It was probably around 30 to 35 minutes for each 2 mile loop. It got slower towards the end, certainly, but there were bathrooms, there was no bears, there was like really good crowd support because everybody who was there, had their own cheering section that was along the course of the 2 miles. And it was hands down one of the best races I've ever done because I was never lost. I knew that if I needed to, I could literally sit down at any time because there was, chairs available along the side of the road because of, all of the crew members. And it was such a great experience. I absolutely loved that one. But most people are like, oh, I could never run 31 times around the same track and see that same thing over and over and over again. But I absolutely loved it.
Very cool. So, what was the most beautiful one that you've ever done?
Ooh, most beautiful. Um, most of my racing is done locally. So it's things that I see when I'm, training and racing at the same time.
Hmm.
I would say, well, the most beautiful for a lot of different reasons. I mean, honestly, just kind of a mental transformation was the 110K that I ran. That was the longest distance that I've ever run. And that one did take me to parts of the area that I'd never been to before. And it was a time of year where it was early fall. And so it was very different from anything that I had ever run before, as far as like some of the changing leaves and different scenery that I don't usually see. And I got to run. I started in the dark and I finished in the dark. And it's just very different running at night than it is during the day. You know, when something's going to take you 19 hours, not all of that is going to be in bright sunshine. So getting to see the place that I love to run at night was such a different experience. And that made it like really, really beautiful and really enjoyable.
Nice. Love that. So what about your husband? Is he still running?
Yes. And
Mhm.
actually, he's kind of, I wouldn't say that he has slowed down. Again, the pandemic really changed how we thought about working out and about what we wanted to chase and what we wanted to do and those kinds of things. And so he is not running as long right now either. And some of that honestly has to do with his working situation as well. He's in a season of his work where he's actually doing a lot more hours than he used to when he was running such long distances. So timing wise, it just kind of worked out for both of us to take a little bit of a step back over the past year and a half, which has been really nice. I can't see a time in my life or his, barring, something catastrophic. I can't see a time in our lives where we won't run. And I mean, call that what you will when we're old. Shuffling along is still going to be running for me. Using a lot more walking breaks is still going to be running for me. It is such an integral part of who we are and what we love. And we love to run together, different places. I mean, our focus actually this year in 2021, rather than doing a lot more racing and doing a lot of long running, we've decided that we're going on adventures together. And so that takes a lot of the pressure off of like any kind of speed or any kind of distance or any kind of like preconceived notion of racing. But we do end up running a lot and hiking a lot and seeing places that we've never seen before and doing things that we've never done before. And we are climbing mountains and doing different things that we wouldn't have done if we were still trying to always go faster or longer or more. It's been such a really nice change of both physical pace and just mental pace to think about doing an adventure instead of going for a run.
Love that. And so to segue to, we talked about mindset of something that actually we both have so much in common.
Yes.
It's going to take some mindset to do ultra marathons. And you even in the green room shared there was an event where you did how many ultras over a very short period of time?
Yeah, I did 4 ultras in the space of 5 weeks. And that was the biggest challenge I think I've ever set for myself in terms of like trying to compete, like stay in a competitive and physical place over the course of a longer period of time. That one was really interesting.
So mindset wise, where do you go? Are there dark moments in ultras?
Oh, always, always. Oh my gosh. I love that question because I think when I first trained for my first 100K, I totally remember picturing myself being just valiant throughout. Like I would struggle silently and be fine and cross the finish line triumphantly and they just don't turn out that way. Like my ultra experience, and for so many people, they hear this story or any of my stories really about ultras, and they're like, but I don't understand what makes you do them. And I will tell you that the way that I'm describing it is why I do ultras. I find a place in my mind that I can continue moving forward any way possible, even when I feel miserable. For me, ultras almost always involve some kind of crying. They frequently involve vomiting. They frequently involve doubting myself and wondering what in the world I'm doing, trying to be here and complete this kind of distance. That kind of darkness doesn't scare me at all. And in fact, it reminds me of how alive I am and why I do this because I can. Because I can.
Love that. That probably echoes the statement that I've got. I remember somebody asked me why I do Ironman, and I remember it was actually a fellow trainer who said, just shaking his head, it's like usually people who are doing those kinds of things are running from something, and I could only look back, and I was actually not upset. So it tells me that I probably was a little more grown up at the time, but I remember just thinking, you until you've been there, you just can't understand it. But it is because it makes you feel so alive.
Yeah.
That I would echo that in, it's a moment, and I don't know ultra, so you'll have to vouch for this, but in the marathon community or the triathlon community, even more so, the community is just so, we'll embrace you. We cheer for you. We'll be standing at the starting line together, but we'll be waiting at the finish line for you in all walks of life. And they're all shapes and sizes of people who do them.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just an amazing community to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I have found that I am kind of channeling in my learning how to embrace moderation and how to embrace more recovery and not pushing myself so hard and so far and so tough is that I realize that it's actually really hard to do less. That this actually is my new challenge to honor what my body wants and needs in different ways. And it's so much harder than I ever thought it was going to be. I mean, when I talk about how, it was so hard to, run 31 miles or 50 miles or 68 miles, like everybody understands that that's going to be hard. Like I don't think anybody except somebody who has run 50 miles, normal people, let's say, look at 50 miles. And most of the comments that I would get from my Facebook friends are things like, I don't even like to drive that far, or things like that. Like it's really obvious that you have to have mental discipline and you have to have fortitude and you have to have like something deep within you in order to complete something like that. But what I'm finding is that you have to have mental discipline and fortitude and a deep love for yourself to do less, also to do the right thing for your body. It's really amazing. When I started thinking about running less, I felt sad. I'll be honest. I mean, I felt sad. I felt sorry for myself. I felt like my glory days were behind me. I felt lots of things that I think are common to a lot of women as they get older and they notice that their bodies are changing and things like that. But what I realized was that giving myself the gift of doing the right thing, giving myself the gift of pushing myself, if you will, to do less in a way that felt really good for my body, that was the feeling that I was chasing. I mean, that's the feeling that I've been chasing during all the ultras, during all of the exercises that I do. I want to feel good. Like that's, even though ultras, I do ultimately feel bad in the middle of some of them. My overarching goal was always to feel good and to feel good about myself. And I'm finding that I can actually access that with less, with moderation. And it's a really interesting mindset shift that I'm currently shifting. I'm not even going to say, I'm through this and it's all, flowers and roses here, because there are absolutely still days when I think about, gosh, what if I could just, run another marathon? What if I could just go hard again? And then I remind myself that this is hard. This is difficult. This is a challenge to do what my body wants instead of what my brain wants.
Yeah, so good. Such a great kind of analogy to where so many people are right now. And, I think once you've thought of yourself as an ultra marathoner or as an Ironman,
Yeah.
it's, every once in a while, I'm going to the pool and I have a swimsuit that actually I should probably retire, but it's got this, what is it called? Embroidered, Iron Man on it in the
Yeah.
front, and I've got a visor, and I put those on for myself.
Yeah.
I need to see it when I'm looking in the mirror. I need to remind myself I'm still that person.
Yep.
But I think we can get caught up in that. And, when your body isn't functioning the same way it did 20 years ago, you've got a different set of hormones right now. We're all in that moment where it's really easy to do the comparison thing on social media, but it's easy to compare you to you then too.
Yes. Oh, yes. And the thing that I think is so interesting, and it occurred to me literally just now when you said that about, the you from 20 years ago, it's like, I think we all know that we're not the us from 20 years ago. The real problem is being right in the middle of changing, because I'm kind of not even the me that I was 6 months ago. And that feels like something that I, quote unquote, should still be. I think that's kind of the sticking point for a lot of us when we're in the middle of change, is that it's really obvious that we're not 20 years old anymore. It's really obvious that we're not even 30 and really not even 40 anymore. But we're still the same person we were a year ago, right? Or a year and a half ago? And yet, no, we're not.
Mm.
I mean, hormonally, biologically, physically, mentally, we're not the same person we were even a short time ago. And that's such an interesting place to be, in the middle of changing in a way that honestly we never have before. When we were on the bell curve going up and we were making all the changes to do more and faster and harder, that seemed like the natural progression of things. It seemed like the direction we, quote unquote, should be going. And yet, when we're doing the downside of the bell curve and doing less and doing what's right for our bodies, it feels different. It feels like we still can compare ourselves to a short time ago. And yet that comparison is just never a good idea. It's so interesting to really think about, what if we compare ourselves to who we're going to be in 10 years? What about embracing this right now?
Yeah, I love that. I love that what you've said is, I'm not the same person about that I was even 6 months ago or a year and a half ago. And then what popped into my head is, it's really hard. We're so judgmental of ourselves for not being good at doing something we've never done before.
Right?
And it's easier to look at tasks and say, well, of course, why would you be good at that? But there's also this like moment in time you're in. You've never been here before. So
Yeah.
why would you be good at it or have mastered it? It's yeah, and we're tough on ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet, I mean, like you said, why would we be good at this?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a nice way of thinking about it. And I mean, I love asking myself questions like that just in general. I mean, it opens up my brain to thinking about things differently, because, until you ask a question like, why would I be good at this? My brain automatically thinks I should. Of course I should be good at this. I should be good at
Mhm.
everything.
Right.
Why?
Right. And
There's so much to
so
do.
makes it look so easy. I
Yes.
remember, I think somebody just said that, Deborah, you make it look so easy. And I'm like, well, I probably got 37 years on you.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
I mean, give yourself a day.
Yeah. I
So,
literally do this for a living. Yes.
yes. Yes. I'm a professional. So,
Yeah. I love it. That's awesome.
I want to ask you something that's kind of out in left field because we've been talking about you and me. It's all about us anyway, by
Always.
the way. But what have you learned? Like what have been some lessons or even a story that you've learned from your community, your killer bees and your audience?
Oh gosh. Probably the thing that I learned. Well, this is going back a little ways, but it was really interesting. When I very first became a personal trainer, my very first client was my mom because nobody else would hire me because I was brand new. I hung out my shingle. I'm like, here I am. I'm 41. I can train you. I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, as none of us do at the beginning of our careers, but really at the beginning of a midlife career, it was it was crickets for a while. Let's just be honest. And so I worked with my mom, who, of course, she's 27 years older than me. So in my mind, in my early 40s, as I was still even launching my own athletic career, frankly, I still had ultras ahead of me at that point. And I had this idea based on my book learning about where people should be and what they should be capable of doing. And I will tell you that my mother disabused every single one of those immediately. that working with somebody her age and really listening to the things that she was talking about and the things that she didn't know about her own body and how it works and what she could do. I mean, it was so fascinating to me as somebody who is so insanely curious about physiology and exercise science and all of those things, to work with somebody who was, and I don't mean to throw my mother under the bus, but she was very deconditioned and had never exercised, honestly, and had never really maybe even wanted to, but was understanding that she was getting older and, she was starting to have some trouble with her balance and things like that. And so working with her taught me so much empathy for where people are. I mean, I think this every day in my community also, that when somebody will ask a question and it's something that feels very obvious to me because I do this for a living and I've been doing this for so long and I'm so naturally curious about exercise and athletic performance and things like that we all come to our health and fitness from really different places. And there is so much misinformation out in the world. I mean, my personal training certificate included. When I got trained, I was told that people should be able to do this. Yes, young people, 30-year-old men should be able to do the things that were in my personal training certification class. Older women who, I was actually just listening to a really recent podcast of yours, I think it was, where you were talking about, I don't remember which one it was, I apologize, but you were saying something or other about how little research is done on women really specifically, but also older women. And it's just shocking to me that is still the case in this day and age, that there is so much to learn and so much misinformation that we women have that doesn't actually apply to us.
That's so true. So true. And I love that you worked with your mom first. That is funny because you're like way ahead of me. I don't think my mom would have hired me. I don't think she would have done it if I'd have paid her.
She didn't
actually.
pay me.
Oh.
I'd
have had to pay my mom.
Yeah, exactly. There was some negotiation involved there, certainly, because I was looking for experience. So, she did pay me an experience. I do appreciate that. I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for my mom for lots of reasons, but I am thankful for that experience because had I come to my first client that was a stranger with this thought that, of course you should be able to hold a plank for 30 seconds. Of course you should be able to run a mile. All of the things that seemed like such an obvious baseline standard, according to my personal training certification. I have yet to meet somebody who really needs a personal trainer who can uphold either one of those standards. Most people come to a personal trainer because they can't do those things on their own, because they need help starting with the absolute basics. And the kind of empathy that I was able to give, because of course it's my mom, I love my mom, taught me how to love all of my clients for just being where they are, wherever they are.
Love, 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 love. Okay. So we could talk all day. I could talk all day too. This has been the most enjoyable part of my day, maybe my week so far. Is there a question? This is always the one I ask. So if you've listened to a couple podcasts, you're already on to me, but is there a question that I should have asked that I didn't?
Ooh, well, should is one of those words that I don't care for because there was really, this is such a mindset thing and I love this. Well, let's ask a question about mindset. Should I say the word should? No, you shouldn't. The word should. Because
don't shut on yourself.
Exactly. That darn word gets us in so much trouble. So no, you shouldn't have asked me anything else.
And such a perfect way to end. Thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was really wonderful to meet you.
And listeners, it's your turn. So do you have a question that you wish I would have probed a little deeper about with Pahla? You can put that below the show notes at flipping50.com/killer bees. And that'll be episode 460. But I want to let you know that when you see that, it's going to look like killer BS. And that was not what this was. Okay. This was just good, plain, clean fun. So what are you waiting for? Let's start flipping 50 today.